Welcome to the Larkspur Planning Commission meeting of Tuesday, September 26. Could we please have a roll call?
Commissioner Swisher.
Present.
Commissioner Chalmers.
Present.
Commissioner Campbell.
Present.
And Commissioners Wagstaff and Commissioner Williamson are both absent. So you have a quorum.
Thank you. So I don't see anyone in the room live tonight. Do we have anyone on Zoom?
Yes, our council representative is attending, or council liaison, Kevin Carroll. A representative for the applicant for the first item is in Zoom, and I believe James Holmes is in the audience in Zoom too, but that's it.
That's it? Okay, great. Thank you. So do we have anyone on Zoom who would like to make a public comment on matters not on the agenda?
No one has their hand raised.
Great, thank you. In that case, can we please have the planning director's report?
Thank you. Today, the Department of Forestry considered the Larkspur's draft safety element that you might have seen. I don't even know if you've seen a draft of that one yet. And they did approve it. So, but it's one step closer to having our housing element and general plan adopted. So we're excited about that decision. And I don't have anything else to report tonight.
So we'll open the public portion of our hearing tonight. We have two items on the agenda. The first one is 233 Monte Vista Larkspur, PLN 2338, the request for 1 year extension of time. Can we please have the staff report?
Yes, the applicants for the project at 233 Monte Vista Avenue are requesting a 1 year extension. The project was approved in 2020 and did receive one extension from the prior planning director, and further extensions are required to be obtained from the planning commission. And the city code has some language regarding design review extensions that says the director shall grant the extension if they determine that no significant changes to information regarding the condition of the property and or the surrounding district have occurred since the original approval. And there's no other guidance for what the planning commission should consider for an extension, but you could consider that criteria to determine this request. And staff doesn't find that there's been any change of circumstances or anything that would warrant us to recommend that you not extend the project for an additional year. So we're recommending a 1 year extension be granted to the applicants. If anyone would like to speak for the applicant, you can if you want to. I don't see any hands raised. Oh, there we go. All right, I'm gonna let him join.
Unmute.
All right.
Can you hear?
We
I'm
can.
sorry. My name is David. Let me see if I can get my video started. Oh, great. Sorry about that. Hello, my name's David. I was the designer and potential contractor to build Monte Vista and the applicant for the extension, 1 year extension. Unfortunately, literally right when we were getting approved, COVID happened, and everything for my applicant just kind of got put on hold for this project for bank funding and all kinds of things. So everything has calmed down for him, and he's trying to get his project started again as soon as possible. So we have talked about starting building season. We've already submitted our building permit application, and we thought that we were submitting in the time per an email from the building department or from the planning department that said, if you submit by this time, then your permit's not going to expire. And there was a little miscommunication with that. The planning department had sent out some letters that said at this time, you need to submit by this time, and otherwise your application is going to expire. And we got some different information from the planning department later. So there's a little bit of confusion when we submitted. And we've been working on it with Elise on how to best figure out our path forward. And it seemed like this would be our best path forward. So he is ready to build, and hopefully we can just move past the confusion and continue with our building permit, which has already been submitted. Any questions for me?
Do we have any questions for the applicant's designer? No. No, thank you very much. Thank you for your comments.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Elise.
Mhm. Do you have anyone else for the applicant or anyone in the audience that would like to make a comment?
I don't see any hands raised.
Great, thank you. In that case, let's bring it back to the commission. Do we have anything that we want to discuss here?
No, it seems very straightforward to me.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I appreciate that it seems like it's a house that fits the lot, and I mean, I know we're just considering an extension, so it seems like it was approved before, and I don't see a reason to not do that now.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it sounds like they're ready to actually start construction now. So as long as it's not getting dragged on again, but
Yeah, that too.
yeah. So I think we can make a motion.
Yeah, I make a motion to approve the extension for application DRVHT 20-5.
And
I'll
Yeah.
second.
thank you. You're only second tonight. So if we can have a vote, please.
Commissioner Chalmers,
Yes.
Commissioner Swisher,
Yes,
and Commissioner Campbell.
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very much. So we'll move on to our second item in the public hearing, which is to consider a draft ordinance that would establish a replacement housing requirement for any project proposed on properties that have rental dwelling units affordable to lower or very low income households, or had affordable units that were vacated or demolished in the 5-year period preceding the application. And we were provided with some materials. And at least
Thanks.
if you could talk to that.
Yeah, I'm
please.
not going to go into all the details in the report because there's a lot of details in there, but try to keep it simple. The state has a no net loss or has no net loss laws. The one that's existed for some time now is one in the density bonus law, but it also comes into play with housing element law and the Housing Crisis Act of 2019. And the point is to ensure that housing developments don't reduce the total number of units on the lot, particularly units that are available to lower income households without replacing those units. And the requirement that currently exists today is in the state density bonus law, and that requires that if someone's coming in for a density bonus project, they need to replace affordable housing that's demolished as part of that project. Density bonus projects are it's a voluntary it's voluntary. The applicants can apply for a density bonus project. The project has to be at least 5 units. And we saw a density bonus application with the Magnolia Village project, but this particular issue didn't come into play because there was no housing at the site. But so there's so far we've had few density bonus projects, so it just doesn't come up that often, but there is an existing requirement for replacement units. And then some new state laws have are now requiring like a 1-to-1 replacement of any units until I believe 2030. And so those requirements are very similar to the state density bonus law, but they had now apply to everything for a period of time during this Housing Crisis Act. There is these particular laws don't apply in high fire severity zones. However, and the city of Larkspur has a large high fire severity zone area, including a lot of areas in Madrone Canyon. However, the state doesn't recognize our local high fire hazard severity zone. It has to be a zone that's designated by the state. So at this time, the state hasn't designated any high fire hazard severity zones in Larkspur, so that particular provision doesn't apply to the city. And then what we're here for today basically is because the housing element now also includes the requirement that if you have a site in your sites inventory, like a site where we're proposing that housing can be built in the next 8 years, that if that site is occupied by housing units, the state requires the city of Larkspur to adopt an ordinance that's equivalent to the state density bonus law requirements for replacement housing. And there's a lot of details that you have in the staff report on what all those terms are for replacement housing, but essentially it's to make sure that the affordable units are replaced. And just to cover the right now, the draft housing element inventory just has not even a handful of sites that have housing units. One is 557 and 559 Magnolia Avenue, and they're just 2 lots near the downtown area. And so if those units came, or the property owner came in for new units there, at this time, they would be required to replace those units under state law, but we're required to pass a law to also require them to replace it and have the same terms as the state density bonus law. So it's somewhat unnecessary for us to pass the law at this time, but it's a state law requirement. And then another site that we have for on the site's housing element inventory is 501 Via Casitas, which is the Tamalpais. However, the idea here was not to replace any of the units there. They're ownership units, and I don't expect that anyone's planning. They're not planning to demolish that building. The idea was they might be able to build additional units, perhaps even for some of the employees down on the lower portion of the site where the parking lot is, and there's not development. So that wouldn't result in any loss of housing, or we wouldn't expect it to. And then the other site that has housing that's on the housing element sites inventory, I believe this actually is 2 sites also, is just the one that's right next to the fire department here downtown. And it has 3 units of housing. It's my understanding that one of the units is rented by a lower income household, and the other 2 rent at market rate, although we don't know the income level of the households. But if we do expect that someone will want to, it was recently purchased, and we do expect someone's going to want to come in with a project on this site. And so the current laws would require them to replace the housing with additional units at the site. So again, the city has to adopt an ordinance that's equivalent to the density bonus law replacement requirements to apply to those sites on any sites that are on the city's housing element. But since we're going through this process now, it's a good time to talk about whether or not you want to extend those protections to other houses. And so I brought up some issues that come up that could be incorporated into a more sort of robust ordinance. One is to extend the replacement requirement to all projects. And there's some, we'd have to have the city's legal counsel opine as to whether or not market rate unit, if there's any issues with market rate units being replaced. Currently, under the state law, we could preclude or require replacement units for market rate units, single family market rate units that are demolished. So the city could just make a requirement that extends beyond 2030 that requires all units to be replaced 1-to-1, which is a good housing policy to have, and especially in an affluent area where it's people do buy adjacent lots or lots with housing and tear them down and then don't replace the housing units. Another issue that you could consider that comes up with this issue is under the state laws currently, the state or the city could require the units to be replaced on site, and also any additional requirements required under our inclusionary housing requirement. I had one example in the code, which was, and I'll try to make it more simple, but let's say there was 5 low-income units on a site and that had to be replaced, and the city's inclusionary requirement requires 5 moderate income units, say. The city's allowed to require both the low income and the moderate income units. Or you could just make a policy that says if you're having to replace for affordable units, that would take care of the moderate income unit requirement, since they're more affordable than what the city would ordinarily require. I guess the upside of requiring more is we get more affordable units. The downside is it probably makes it less appealing for developers to build housing if they're having to even do more units. And also it also makes them more qualified for density bonus incentives and concessions so that they could potentially build even more and more units. So the overall project could increase in size probably significantly if the city was to push that requirement. And then another issue that comes up is we do have some protections for demolition of historic structures. So if a structure could potentially be listed on the city's inventory, the structure should go through the Heritage Preservation Board. However, we haven't studied every single house. So and they haven't looked at every house. So they have a short list of additional houses that they want to include on the inventory. But if someone were to come in to demolish a house that could potentially be historic, but just hasn't been looked at, we might lose a historic structure unless we sort of put the burden on the applicant to demonstrate that it's not eligible for listing. So that if you're interested in pursuing a little tightening up the demolition requirements, we could do that at this time too. The tricky part about that is we also have to define what demolition is, and that we haven't really had to address that because you don't currently have like a demolition permit requirement. So it'll be complicated, and there's definitely more discussion that would have to be had about that. And I think that covers sort of these additional requirements. So we've attached a ordinance that would cover the requirement that deal with the state law requirement that we apply the state density bonus law to housing element sites. It's worded in a way that also would just require replacement housing for any project that's proposing to demolish housing. However, we don't have the city attorney's comments on this document yet. And also because we have these other issues we'd like to get comments on, my recommendation would be to just give staff comments tonight, and then we would just continue the item and return again. So if you want to keep it simple, we could come back with something simple that's been reviewed by the city attorney. And if you are interested in extending the requirements at all, we could come back with something that deals with that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Does anyone have any questions for Elise? I had one question, for clarification question, but I wanted you two to go ahead first.
Just quickly about the demolition issue. Larkspur does not have a demolition ordinance.
We
Permit?
don't. So yeah, no. So it's worded strangely in the
Well, my-
historic
right.
structure regulations.
Well, my understanding about demolition was that if a structure is taken down to just an existing wall, are you familiar with that issue, right?
Well, there's, I guess, what's triggered sometimes is the non-conforming structure regulations. So if someone is doing, I think the threshold's 70%. If you're doing more than 70% of the value of the structure, then you have to bring the site into conformance with current parking and setback regulations. But
Right.
if you're just coming in to demolish a house, potentially you could just come and get a building permit and demolish the house without any review by anyone. The catch is the historic regulations do provide that if you're demolishing a structure that's potentially could be listed in the Larkspur Historic Resource Inventory, then you need to go through the Heritage Preservation Board. But if it's a site that hasn't been reviewed, like how would we know that? We would have to be, we could on staff commission a review of a house, but it's not a good way to have that process happen.
Right. Okay. I got it.
I guess I'm just kind of tagging on to that. Seems like the potentially historic thing could be problematic. I mean, we ran into this issue several months ago with a
Right.
house on 93 Magnolia where there were some public comments that it was a historic resource, and it may well have been, but you know, that one did have a recorded historic survey, but you know, the folks who bought the house were under the impression, rightly, you know, based on the survey, that it wasn't a historic resource. And so you could be, pulling the rug out from under somebody that, you know, is under one impression based on all the documents and guidance that the city has. And, you know, then we change that sort of at the last minute. So That doesn't
Yeah,
seem.
so I guess so if you had a demolition permit requirement, then we would tell people right off the bat, oh, if you're coming to demolish this home, you're gonna need to provide us with the historic resource study to demonstrate that it's not historic, or unless it's just so clearly not historic, that we could make that call, but it would just be something that people would learn, or you would, I guess they would know buying that they're gonna need a permit to demolish
Sure,
it.
okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
Right, okay. I'm just going back to basics, excuse me. I understand the first two, which is that there's a state requirement for the state density bonus law. So if somebody wants to claim one of the waivers or concessions, they have to comply with the replacement requirements under state density
Right.
bonus. And I understand that if it's if it's a site that's listed in our housing element, then they have to comply with those same rules.
but then, right,
They're
then
on
we need
replacement.
an ordinance to say that they need to comply with those same rules.
So, but it's the middle one. You had a slide on
And then,
it.
then there's
That's
the
the one that I wasn't
Housing
sure.
Accountability Act, or the new state laws
This SB
requires the housing to be
3330.
replaced anyway, but I believe it only, it require, I mean, right now it requires the housing to be replaced anyway.
Well, what does it?
The
So you're
state-
saying SB
The SB 330, the new, like, the new Housing Accountability Act laws, if they're calling it that. Here, let's see. They just require one-to-one replacement.
So I guess I never understood what's the point then of having the other two categories? Is everything falls under this SB 330?
There's probably
Or
some
330.
subtle differences in how, but I think SB 330 might have more protections for tenant protections and relocation assistance requirements that we're not being required to adopt. But it's true there. So if we did nothing, we'd still have to comply with the replacement housing requirements under SB 330 until
2030.
2030. But then our housing element will already, or I guess our housing element runs to 2031. So there would be maybe a 1 year period of time where it might not apply. And
So
chances are the state legislature will extend it. We don't know that, but
right, so again, just so I understand this, and you two probably understand this already, but if any house, then that means that any house that it's demolished has to be replaced.
right.
Because we
Right
were
now,
talking about an
right.
example of what happens if you have two people, somebody buys two lots and then
Right.
tries to merge it. So that's not permitted.
Right now, it's not permitted under SB 330,
Okay. And that is state law that that applies to
the city of
the
Larkspur.
city. Okay, so we have to comply with that, and we have to comply as
Right.
well as the state density law and the
Correct.
the housing elements. There's three different criteria. Okay. Okay, now I understand it better. For some reason, I thought the middle one
Yeah, it's,
wasn't a state law requirement, but it sounds like it is.
it is too, and it's like I say, it's somewhat meaningless because we're already having to require that. But we have to do it just to comply with state housing law.
Okay. Go ahead.
So
please.
was your suggestion, the first suggestion that you had for, topics to consider, adding to this, so going beyond replacing all units 1-to-1, that would be an indefinite instead of stopping it at 2030?
Right.
Because we have to do it through
Right.
2030. This would be, if we wanted,
Just
if
have
we
that as
choose,
a
we can just
Larkspur
have
law.
it as a Larkspur law.
Right.
Got it. Okay.
All right. So it's the timeline that you want us to
I
consider.
mean, I guess that's what mainly it affects, would be the timeline. That it would be, and it would be, I mean, demonstrating Larkspur has a policy to try to maintain housing units or preserve housing units.
And then you were talking about the property in Alexander Avenue.
Right, so there was one house on Alexander Avenue that was demolished and never replaced. There might be more that I just am not aware of, but that was the one that was brought to my attention, that it was approved for a new house and they just demolished and never built
And
the
they
new
just
house.
and there's no consequence for them to do that.
You know, I saw that there was a fence permit that had come before you, and then there was a requirement on the fence permit. or some sort of, somehow it was tied to this replacement house requirement, but I think it would be difficult to enforce, but it's worth, I could look into it. I don't
Okay.
know. I don't know that it's be impossible to enforce, but I'm not sure what would be entailed in forcing them to
Okay.
construct their housing unit.
I'm a little surprised by that, the state issue that if you wanted to merge lots, you'd have to replace the house. That seems an infringement on someone's right to do what they want to do with their property that they buy. And I understand the rationale behind it, but let's look at a concrete example. You know, the property that is off of Ardmore, where there is that very old shack that they wanted to remodel there.
Mhm.
And then the new purchaser is on a double lot, and he's building a house there on Ardmore, and there's a pool where on the lot it used to be. Now, there was not a structure there that was demolished to do that?
This is before my time.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was vacant or not.
It might have been a vacant lot. So, but if you have a vacant lot without a house and you want to merge two lots,
That wouldn't be a problem.
you're still allowed to do that.
And
If
then
you-
under the state SB 330 law too, it appears that if you had a single family home, you could do a smaller structure. There's no requirement for the size or like it could be an ADU type of
Right,
structure or something
right.
like
So
that.
that's the thing. The exception would be like if you could demolish like an old ramshackle house that's on a lot and construct a more modern, modestly sized ADU there on that, as long as you're providing the same kind of housing element there. Is that right?
That's my understanding.
And put it on a different part of the lot so you could, let's say, enjoy the property more.
Yeah, and then it
Yeah.
might be more affordable because it's a smaller unit.
Right, right. Yeah.
Because I'm sort of thinking, it looks like you're looking at my notes here because I have
No,
got
no.
infringement.
Yeah, I mean,
infringement of
it does seem like a giant infringement on people's property rights. I'm surprised.
And that's, so right now the state law appears to allow that,
Yeah.
but I would want the city attorney to opine on that because I have read somewhere that there was issues, I think maybe in Berkeley where they did have a one-to-one replacement for market rate. I think you'd have to have enough findings that we're in like a housing crisis and don't want to lose any housing units, including market rate units,
Right.
in order to justify something like that.
I mean, and I'd like to hear public comment on this too. But actually, let's do that before I give my opinion on that. Yeah. Unless you have any more questions for Elise.
No.
Okay, so let's hear from the public and then we can talk about what we think here.
All right, I'm going to call on Mr. Holmes. You should be allowed to talk.
James Holmes, Larkspur. Yes, I think there's a lot to recommend. Most of the aspects of this ordinance. The medical slogan is "First, do no harm," and that seems to be a worthwhile slogan in housing policy too. I'll tell you what the evidence of my observation is on just the 100 and 200 blocks of Madrone Avenue in my neighborhood. On the 100 block at the corner of Orange and Madrone, there were 3 units demolished. They were replaced with 1 unit for a net loss of 2. And next door up the street, there were also 3 units, and they were demolished and replaced with 1 unit for a net loss of 2. Opposite my old family home, there were 2 units, and they were replaced with 0. It was an expanded yard and house. On the 200 block of Madrone Avenue, opposite Olive, there were 2 units that were demolished, and they were replaced with 1 for a net loss of 1. At Ridgeway and Madrone, there were a total of 2 units on separate parcels. They were both demolished and combined into a huge yard for a net loss of 2. So that in 2 blocks of Madrone, that was a net loss of 9 units, of which 4 of them were small cottages and I think 5 were small main houses. Now up on Olive, there was a unit demolished, but although I have to admit I think it was vacant and in disrepair. And then up Millard, which is a little street off Olive, there were 2 units were lost, one of which, though, and this shows the complexity of it, one was demolished at the demands of the city, and the other was demolished by a tree. But in any event, that the fact that you have such a large loss in the Madrone Avenue area definitely had, in just 2 blocks, a loss of units and a loss of what I would call economic diversity, because these little ancillary units were occupied by people who were on the lower income of the scale. I believe it's worthwhile to expand this throughout the city, unless this would somehow cause more density bonus to kick in. But I definitely would not do anything else, such as requiring both moderate and the lower income, so that people could just pyramid on top of that. And I do think you should extend it indefinitely, because that makes sense. There's no reason to cause the problems of having a sunset of 1 year or 2 years. Finally, with regard to the historic aspect, it seems to, I support this, but maybe it could be limited to the houses that are rated C or unrated. That seems to be where the problem is. C rated or unrated really haven't been looked at. The ones that have been rated B and are on the list, there's no reason to have a presumption there, because they already would need to come in to the city to take it off the list in order to be demolished. But it does, in light of the debacle at 53 Magnolia, where it had not really been looked at, it had sort of been given a provisional C, but it hadn't been looked at carefully, or where it's not been looked at, that is where there needs to be additional notification to the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Is there anyone else who would like to make a comment?
There are no hands raised.
Great, thank you. One question though, it's all those houses that he was talking about being demolished, are we talking about over the last 50 years or 10 years? Because
Mr.
I wasn't
Holmes.
really aware that there were so many.
Go ahead, Mr. Holmes.
Since I've lived here, I've not seen any major demolition. And I've been here a while now.
In the last 5 to 10 years.
Really?
Most of them in the last 5 years. But the ones on the 200 block opposite Olive, that was about 10 years ago. And one of the ones at Ridgeway and Madrone that was 5 years ago, and the other was about 15 years ago. The others were about 5 years ago.
All right, thank you. So we should discuss what we want to do here and how we want to handle Elise's recommendations or questions. I guess they're questions.
I think this is a really complex topic, and I think that it's would be premature to make binding decisions about it without, the city attorney weighing in on the provisions of it. Especially regarding demolition. I mean, I think that it needs to be defined more clearly. And so I would propose that we really don't adopt any thing binding tonight until we have better information.
I think we're just providing further information, right? Or
yeah, and just really preliminary thoughts would be useful in case we could, so we can research if you have questions.
Well, okay, so then my questions would be that, I mean, I would like to see a better and more clear understanding of what constitutes demolition. And I would also like to clarify the whole infringement concept. What within state law do we have leeway?
And this is primarily for like a single family.
Yeah, single family. I mean, I don't have as many questions and don't have any problem with multi-family dwellings. I understand. Let's say if somebody decided they wanted to take out a 100 unit dwelling and replace it with a single family home, that's a problem.
Right.
But I don't, I guess I need to understand this issue more before I even make an intelligent comment or even half intelligent comment about it.
And the other question would, at least that I would have too, is if you had any other thoughts about second units. So if you had a single family home and a second unit, would there be any inclination to protect the second unit, or is it, like, what would be sort of off limits to the ordinance?
Well, I think that we're going to actually be facing that. I think a lot of these issues currently right now with the rules regarding accessory units and ADUs. If at some point in the future, a homeowner decides that they don't want to have an ADU there, are they going to be now bound to maintain that ADU as a housing unit? I mean, I think that's opens up a whole kettle of fish that.
I think it also opens up a, kind of a can of worms where if we're allowing ADUs now under the assumption that, you can have extra house on your lot basically, or extra floor area because you're providing another housing unit. We've discussed on the commission whether that's really another housing unit or not in some of these cases, but that's sort of the presumption, is that you can have extra house because you're providing a housing unit, and we think that's good for the community. And so I think if we go, if we say, well, you can, and you can demolish that house and build it back as one unit without the ADU, assuming that's of a similar size to the current house, then we would be, allowing larger houses without the benefit of the second unit, however real that may be. But
again, I want
know.
to see if I understand that. So that, to me, that scenario would not be permitted under existing state law requirements.
Or
That somebody's,
the local requirements have a provision that says if you've received some type of bonus, and you're removing like the kitchen, and then you have to take that bonus area away. So you kind of, I don't know how practical it is to enforce that, but that's it. Currently, we do have sort of a requirement that you'd lose your.
I mean, which
extra
makes sense
area.
because it's a giant loophole. I mean, if you, for
Right.
instance, could put an ADU in as square footage and then demolish the whole thing and then build a new unit with the same square footage without the ADU, you've just bypassed the whole,
Right.
FAR and all whatever rules. And I'm sure that's not allowed. So, I mean, again, without getting into the weeds, I don't think that's
so let me ask the question then. So if you have a house with an ADU or junior ADU attached or on the property, is that defined as 2 units per SB 330?
I believe so. I think
We should get clarification on that, because if that is defined as 2 units under SB 330, then there you have it. You cannot demolish it and build one house. You have to build 2 houses
Right
because
now.
it's 1-to-1 replacement.
right. I think that's true today, but I'll have to double check.
Right. But if it's not, then I think it's up to the commission. And I'd almost rather do it when we have more members
Right.
here than just the 3 of us.
Right.
for sure.
We can discuss, is that something that we then as a city want to go further and say, no, it does have to be 1-to-1. I mean, my kind of inclination is to, because the state law has been so much in flux recently, and there's been so much kind of pushback and changes, and I don't know what's going to happen, is try and keep in line with state law as much as we can for the time being, in case that then gets changed again. Rather than try and go over and beyond, and then we find in the future it moves the other way. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's the way we should do it. That's just my sort of personal opinion. And again, I would prefer all of us to be here. And but to address that question, I think that might,
Yeah, it sounds like that.
scenario might already
It
answer
might,
it.
yeah,
because
the
this-
state law might prevent that right now. And as you say, because the state law is in flux, if they extend that law indefinitely, then maybe there is no issue
Mhm.
for Larkspur to take care of.
Right. And then we would just keep in line with the state law.
I had another thing that I was wondering if you guys could look into, is not that I don't trust Mr. Holmes, but he addressed a couple of blocks. Is this an issue in Larkspur? I mean, that where houses have been demolished? I mean, we don't, and not replaced, I guess, are we losing a significant amount of housing from this?
That's a good question. I mean, there's the one on Alexandra, and again,
Mhm.
I'm sort of surprised that the city doesn't have more kind of power within your kind of to go in and just enforce them, force them to build with fines and right? Because if somebody's not in compliance with a particular permit or they haven't complied with a condition,
I'm
gonna-
imagining these ones that he's describing, maybe they just were not considered potentially historic and just could be demolished that would be my guess, but, or maybe they came through with a planning commission review and were approved to be demolished. So I can get more information. I think that's
Okay.
good. It's
yeah, it'd be
good
interesting
information
to
for you to
know
have.
like what happens there. But I think with the housing density law requirement, we're sort of stuck with that. So
Right.
we sort of have to, I understand how we can. we
Adopt
would-
something.
Yeah, and again, with the housing element. And I think with the housing element, that's a very known thing. The areas are identified. Somebody coming in is going to hopefully be professional and have the expertise. They'll do the right research. They know what they have to do. And if they're going to demolish, they would build the right thing. So I can sort of understand that. And then your question about the inclusionary units.
Oh, right.
Were you suggesting then that instead of saying it's got to be, were you suggesting that instead of replacing exactly with what's there today, they could go to a lower income level and that would suffice? Is that what you're suggesting?
Or the replacement unit requirement would require replacement of what's there today at whatever income levels there
Yeah.
today. The city's inclusionary requirement could require that developer to build new units that are affordable. And so you could give someone a break if they're doing a replacement so that they don't have to do so many new affordable units. Or you could require them to replace the units and do the city's inclusionary
Oh, I see.
new affordable replacement units. So you would end up with more affordable units.
And the replacement would be not less than the inclusionary housing, right? So if, for example, they have one low income unit on a site that they need to replace, but the inclusionary part of it, the development's sufficiently big that they need two, for example, they would be required to build two. You know,
Yeah, so in that example, let's say the city's requirement was for 2 units and they're required to replace 1 unit. I mean, potentially the city could get 3 affordable, like deed restricted affordable units out of that. Or one of the 2 city required units could be the replacement unit.
got it. So it'd be 2 or 3,
Yeah.
either
so
addition or
and
whatever's bigger.
It's gonna be, our requirements require certain moderate and low income, so it would be different in every circumstance, but the general policy would be good to know. It might come up at some point, so at least you'd know, is this gonna, should we have those count towards the city's inclusionary or not?
Okay, well, we can talk about that when we have a full quorum.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want from us tonight?
No, I think it's a good idea to have everyone here.
Okay. All right, well, I think if we have nothing else to say, that we can close that matter.
Do we need to continue it to?
Do we?
No.
No.
Okay,
No,
we'll
I
just
don't think
close
it's,
it.
yeah, I think we should just close it. What I do is my agenda. All right, so that completes the public. Oh, yeah, I'm on. So that completes the public portion of the hearing tonight. Thank you.
Oh, you've got.
I have it here, thanks. So the business items are the approval of the minutes from August 22. I think with one,
I wanted to recommend one addition to the motion regarding the objective standards. So the direction would be to include this, there was an attachment to the staff report that had recommendations and that wasn't included. So it would say, it would read adopt the draft ordinance with suggested edits by staff and attachment to the staff report, the commission and consultant ELS. So it incorporates all of those different recommendations.
yes, that's fine by me. Yep.
Yeah.
So can we have a motion to approve the minutes, please?
I make a motion to approve the minutes of, was it May 26th?
August 20.
August 22, sorry, August 22.
It was a few months in between.
A second.
Commissioner Chalmers,
Yes,
Commissioner Campbell,
Yes.
Commissioner Swisher.
Yes.
Okay, the motion carries unanimously.
thank you. Do we have any planning commissioners reports tonight? No. I just wanted to ask if the next meeting was going on as normal, or is there anything we should look out for between now and then? And do we have an update on the Lucky site?
We have no update on the Lucky site that I've heard of. And I don't know if anything is ready for the next meeting. We'll keep you posted if it gets canceled. We'll try to let you know right away. We'd probably be sending notices out next week for that meeting. But we haven't had that many applications. We just received a new home for a site in Green Brae that we're going to try to notify the neighbors early on, just to try to get their comments before, so they don't just hear about it when the hearing comes up. But yeah, there's incomplete applications, so we're waiting for people to complete their applications so we can bring them before you.
Great, well, thank you. If we can have a motion to close the meeting,
I will make a motion to adjourn.
I will second.
and we can all
All
say
those in
yes.
favor?
Aye.
Yeah, thank you.
Motion carries.
Thank you.